After months of unpacking boxes and settling into my new home, I needed an escape. The stress of relocating across the country for work had taken its toll. Moving to Lakeside Estates seemed perfect on paper. Affordable homes, good schools nearby, and most importantly, access to Willow Lake, which the real estate agent had enthusiastically described as a fisherman's paradise. I discovered the spot one early morning in April, when the fog still clung to the water surface like a thin blanket. The first time I visited the lake, dew still glistened on the grass as I made my way down a narrow path that wound between two properties. The lake appeared before me, calm and inviting in the soft morning light. Birds called to each other across the water. No other people were around. Just me, nature, and the promise of peaceful hours ahead. I set up my gear on a small wooden dock that jutted about 15 feet into the water. My rod cast a long shadow across the surface as I baited my hook. That first morning, I caught 3 decent-sized bass and 1 catfish, but more valuable than the catches was the tranquility that settled into my bones. For the first time since moving, I felt at home. The rhythmic casting and reeling, the patient waiting, the gentle lapping of water against the dock posts, it all worked like therapy for my frayed nerves. I returned to my house feeling renewed, already planning my next visit. Over the next few weeks, I established a routine. Every Saturday and Sunday morning, I would arrive at the lake just before sunrise, thermos of coffee in one hand, tackle box in the other. Sometimes I would stay for hours, watching the fog lift and the day brighten around me. Occasionally, other fishermen would appear, nodding silent greetings before finding their own spots along the shoreline. There seemed to be an unspoken code of respect: keep your distance, keep quiet, and respect the peace. One Sunday in May, I overheard a conversation between 2 older men fishing about 50 yards down the shore from me. Their voices carried across the still morning water. "Committee meeting tomorrow night. They want to restrict access to residents only," one said. "Can they even do that legally? This water belongs to the state, not the HOA," the other replied. "Since when has legal stopped Margaret and her crew from doing whatever they want?" I did not think much of it at the time. Neighborhood politics did not concern me. I had moved here to escape stress, not find new sources of it. But the following weekend, I noticed a woman standing on the path leading to the dock. She wore crisp white pants and a blue blazer despite the early hour. Her blonde hair was styled perfectly, not a strand out of place. She did not carry fishing equipment. She simply stood, watching me with arms crossed. Our eyes met briefly. Her gaze was cold, evaluating. She made a small note in a leather-bound notebook before turning on her heel and walking back toward the neighborhood. Something about the encounter left me unsettled. That evening, I decided to do some research. According to the State Department of Natural Resources website, Willow Lake was classified as public water. Any licensed angler had the legal right to fish there, regardless of surrounding property ownership. I printed the regulations and tucked them into my tackle box. Something told me I might need them. 2 weeks passed without incident. Then one Saturday morning in early June, I arrived at my usual time to find something new: a red and white sign hammered into the ground at the beginning of the path. "Lakeside Estates residents only. Members only beyond this point. Violators will be reported." Similar signs had appeared all around the lake perimeter, spaced about 30 yards apart. I stood contemplating the sign, fishing rod in hand. Technically, I was a resident of Lakeside Estates, though I had not joined the HOA. Membership had been presented as optional when I purchased my home. And regardless of residency, the lake was public water according to state law. I decided to proceed to my usual spot. I had just cast my first line when I heard footsteps on the dock behind me. A man in his 60s with military short gray hair and pressed khaki shorts approached. His polo shirt bore an embroidered logo. Lakeside Estates HOA Board. "Excuse me," he said, his tone formal but not yet hostile. "Did you see the signs we posted? This area is restricted to HOA members only." I turned to face him fully. "Good morning. Yes, I saw the signs, but I live in Lakeside Estates, on Maple Street." He pulled out a small tablet. "Name?" "Daniel Matthews." He scrolled through what appeared to be a list. "Mr. Matthews, I do not see you on our membership roster. The lake amenities are for dues-paying members only." "I understand your position," I replied, trying to keep my tone respectful. "But according to state regulations, this is public water. Anyone with a fishing license has lega el access." His face hardened. "That is not how things work here. The HOA maintains these grounds and the dock you are standing on. The board voted unanimously last month to restrict lake access." "I would be happy to discuss this further, but I have verified the regulations. The shoreline may be HOA property, but the water itself is public." Our conversation grew increasingly tense. Other residents walking by slowed to listen. Some nodded in agreement with me, while others glared as if I was committing a grave offense by simply being there with a fishing rod. The board member finally left with a warning that I was on notice and that further actions would be taken if I continued to trespass. I remained at the lake but found my peaceful morning thoroughly disrupted. That afternoon, I received a text from a neighbor I had briefly met during move-in. Tom invited me over for coffee, saying he had heard about the lake incident. Curious, I accepted. Tom and his wife Janet had lived in Lakeside Estates for 15 years. Over coffee at their kitchen table, they explained the situation. "The lake has always been open to everyone," Janet said. "But the new HOA leadership that took over last year has been on a power trip." Tom nodded. "Margaret is the president, but Corinne Winters is the real force behind all these new restrictions. She is the vice president and head of the compliance committee." "What do you know about her?" I asked. "Corinne moved here 3 years ago from some gated community in Arizona. Within months, she was issuing violation notices for grass half an inch too tall or trash cans left out 5 minutes past collection time," Tom explained. Janet leaned forward. "She has driven 2 families to move away with her harassment, always hiding behind HOA rules, always technically within her authority, but using it like a weapon." Before I left, Tom introduced me to their neighborhood text group, longtime residents who opposed the increasingly restrictive HOA policies. I was not alone in this fight, but I had just made a powerful enemy. 3 days later, I found an official-looking envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a formal warning letter on Lakeside Estates HOA letterhead. The language was cold and legalistic. "This notice serves as an official warning regarding unauthorized access to private community property. On June 5th, you were observed utilizing the lake facilities without proper membership credentials. Further violations may result in fines as outlined in Covenant Section 83B or legal action for trespassing." The letter was signed by Corinne Winters, Vice President and Compliance Committee Chair. A photocopy of the HOA covenant highlighting the relevant section was attached. The highlighted text referred to community amenities, but made no specific mention of the lake. The letter trembled in my hands, not from fear but from a rising sense of indignation. This was clear intimidation, an attempt to override state law with HOA policies. I decided to seek official clarification. The next morning, I drove to the County Department of Natural Resources office. The DNR officer, A weathered man named Johnson with decades of experience listened patiently to my situation. He pulled out official maps and documentation that confirmed what I already knew. Willow Lake was classified as public waters. He explained that while the HOA might own the land surrounding the lake and structures like docks, they could not legally restrict access to the water itself. "We see this all the time," Officer Johnson said, signing a letter on official DNR letterhead confirming the lake's public status. "Private communities trying to claim public resources. Stand your ground but document everything. These situations can get messy." Armed with this official documentation, I continued my weekend fishing routine, but the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Now, each visit included an audience. Karen's supporters, I had begun to think of them as Karen's Patrol, would appear shortly after I arrived. They kept their distance but made their presence known. They would take photos of me with their phones, make obvious calls while staring in my direction. One woman even set up a chair directly facing my fishing spot, just watching me for an hour while making notes. It was clearly coordinated harassment, designed to make my peaceful hobby so uncomfortable that I would give up. I started bringing my own phone on a tripod, positioned to record my entire fishing session. I documented each interaction, each person who approached or surveilled me. I kept a detailed log of dates, times, and descriptions. The phone became both my shield and my weapon, evidence gathering for a conflict I increasingly felt was inevitable. Behind the scenes, the situation was taking an emotional toll. I found myself lying awake at night, rehearsing arguments in my head. I would check out my window before leaving my house, scanning for any of Aaron's allies. Walking through the neighborhood became an exercise in tension, nodding politely to people who might be actively working to drive me out. One evening, I received a text from Janet. "Karen was asking questions about you at the grocery store today. Wanted to know if you had any history of trouble with authority or anger issues. She is building a case against you." The isolation was perhaps the worst part. Despite the support from Tom, Janet, and a few others, most neighbors kept their distance, unwilling to be caught in the crossfire. My home, which should have been my sanctuary, now felt like an outpost in hostile territory. What had begun as a simple desire to enjoy fishing had evolved into something far more significant. This was no longer just about lake access. It was about standing up to bullying, about refusing to be intimidated out of legal rights, about drawing a line against petty tyranny disguised as rule enforcement. I consulted with a lawyer friend who specialized in property law. He confirmed the DNR's position and advised me to continue documenting everything. "If they escalate beyond harassment to actual interference, you will have options," he told me. "Just make sure you do not give them anything they can use against you. No angry outbursts, no retaliatory actions. Let them dig their own hole." I was determined not to be driven away from a place and activity I had every right to enjoy. Each morning I returned to the lake was both an act of recreation and an act of quiet defiance. The water that had once been my escape from stress had paradoxically become the battlefield for a neighborhood Cold War. But I refused to surrender my peace without a fight. Saturday, July 17th began as the perfect fishing morning. I arrived at the lake just before sunrise, the water uncommonly still, reflecting the orange-pink sky like a mirror. The air held that special quality found only at dawn, crisp, clean, full of possibility. Small fish were already jumping at the far end of the lake, breaking the surface tension as they caught insects. I set up my gear with practiced efficiency, premium spinning rod, my grandfather's lucky tackle box, the new depth finder I had treated myself to after a particularly stressful work week. For the first time in weeks, none of Corinne's patrol was present. Perhaps even they could not muster the energy for 5:30 a.m. surveillance. I felt my shoulders relaxing as I cast my line, the familiar whir of the reel providing its own special music. For nearly an hour, I enjoyed perfect solitude and decent fishing. I had caught and released 2 bass and was sipping coffee from my thermos when I heard it, the sharp, deliberate sound of heels on the wooden dock planks. The cadence was forceful, angry. I did not need to turn around to know who was approaching. "You," the voice was sharp enough to startle a blue heron from its hunting spot nearby. "We have had enough of this." I turned slowly to see Corinne Winters standing 5 feet away. This was the first time I had seen her up close. Her blonde hair was styled in an expensive-looking bob. Designer sunglasses perched atop her head. She wore white capri pants, a pastel blue blouse, and a visibly seething expression. 2 other women stood at the shore end of the dock, watching. "Good morning," I replied calmly, very aware that my tripod camera was recording. "Beautiful day for fishing." "Do not good morning me," she snapped, stepping closer. "I am Corinne Winters, HOA Vice President. You have been warned repeatedly about trespassing on private property." "I understand your concern," I said, maintaining an even tone. "But as I have explained to the board, this is public water according to state law. I have verification from the Department of Natural Resources." I gestured toward my tackle box where I kept the documentation. "I do not care what some government bureaucrat told you," Corinne hissed, her voice rising. "This is OUR Lake, our community. We pay thousands in HOA fees to maintain these grounds, and we are not going to let some outsider ignore our rules." By now, several early morning walkers had stopped along the shore path, watching the confrontation unfold. I noticed Tom among them, his phone raised, apparently also recording. "Ms. Winters, I live here too. I have rights too." "You are not a member," she interrupted, jabbing her finger toward my face. "You refuse to join the HOA. You think you can just take advantage of amenities without contributing. People like you are what is wrong with this neighborhood." Her face had flushed red, and spittle flew from her mouth as she shouted. I took a small step back, conscious of the dock edge behind me. "I am going to ask you once to please step back and lower your voice," I said. "We can discuss this civilly." Civilly," Corinne's voice reached a new pitch. "There is nothing civil about trespassing, about stealing access from paying members." She advanced another step. I could smell her expensive perfume now, could see the veins standing out on her neck. "The police are on their way," one of the women called from shore. I doubted this was true, but Corinne seemed emboldened by the claim. "You have exactly 30 seconds to pack up your things and get off this dock before they arrive," Corinne demanded, now just 2 feet away from me. "Ms. Winters, I am not breaking any laws. I have every right to—" I never finished the sentence. Corinne's control snapped. With both hands, she shoved me hard in the chest. The force, surprising from her small frame, caught me completely off guard. My heels hit the edge of the dock. Arms windmilling, I lost my balance and plunged backward into the lake. The shock of cold water drove the air from my lungs. My fishing rod flew from my grasp. My phone, which I had in my pocket, was instantly submerged. I heard gasps and shouts from the shore as I struggled to find footing in the muddy bottom. When I surfaced, sputtering and pushing wet hair from my eyes, Corinne still stood on the dock. Rather than showing any remorse or shock at her own actions, she continued her tirade. "Private property," she screamed, pointing at me bobbing in the water. "Next time it will be worse. We are done being nice about this." The onlookers along the shore stood frozen in disbelief. Then several sprang into action at once. Tom rushed down to the water's edge, extending a branch to help pull me toward shore. Another neighbor was on her phone, actually calling the police this time. A third man was shouting at Karen, telling her to back away. Karen seemed oblivious to the reaction her assault had provoked. She continued ranting about property rights and trespassers as I sloshed my way to shore, water streaming from my clothes. My expensive fishing rod had sunk completely out of sight. My tackle box had fallen onto the dock, contents scattered. As I reached solid ground, dignity in tatters but anger building, Karen finally seemed to register the expressions on the faces around her. Several phones were pointed in her direction, recording everything. The gravity of what she had done appeared to dawn on her, but rather than apologize, she straightened her blouse and addressed the crowd. "He has been repeatedly warned. This is what happens when people refuse to follow the rules." With that, she turned and began walking briskly back toward the neighborhood, her two companions hurrying to keep up, suddenly silent. I stood dripping on the shore, surrounded by concerned neighbors, but beneath the humiliation and discomfort of soaked clothes, something hardened within me. This had crossed a line from harassment to assault, and it had happened in front of witnesses. Karen's reign of neighborhood terror was about to face something she clearly never expected: consequences. The fluorescent lights of the police station cast harsh shadows across the institutional gray walls. I sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, still wearing damp clothes, a borrowed towel around my shoulders. Water dripped steadily from my jeans onto the industrial carpet, forming a small puddle around my squelching shoes. Officer Ramirez, a compact woman with observant eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, sat across from me, typing my statement into her computer. She had been skeptical when I first arrived. People coming in soaking wet to report being pushed into lakes was apparently not an everyday occurrence at the Willow Creek Police Department. "Let me make sure I understand," she said, glancing up from her screen. "This HOA board member physically pushed you off a dock because you were fishing in what she claims is private water." "Yes, officer," I replied. "I have been fishing there regularly for months. The lake is public water according to state regulations, which I confirmed with the Department of Natural Resources. I have documentation." I gestured to the plastic bag containing my now-drying DNR letter. Officer Ramirez nodded slowly, then turned her attention to my phone, which I had managed to revive enough to show her the video evidence. The footage was unmistakable: Karen's approach, her escalating anger, and the clear moment when she pushed me with both hands. The officer's expression changed as she watched, professional detachment giving way to genuine concern. "This is assault, plain and simple," she confirmed, already pulling forms from a drawer. "And we have it on video with multiple witnesses. I will need to take formal statements from anyone who saw the incident, but this is fairly straightforward." As Officer Ramirez processed my complaint, another officer escorted me to the station's medical room where a paramedic examined me. The fall had resulted in minor injuries, bruising on my back and a sprained wrist from my attempt to break my fall. Each injury was photographed, measured, and documented for the official report. "These reports will be forwarded to the district attorney's office," Officer Ramirez explained when I returned. "Given the video evidence and witness statements, they will likely pursue assault charges. Ms. Winters will be contacted for questioning, and you may be called to provide additional testimony." I nodded, the reality of the situation sinking in. What had begun as a simple desire to fish had escalated into police reports and potential criminal charges. But beneath my discomfort was a steely resolve. Karen had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. My phone, partially functional despite its dunking, buzzed with notifications as I left the station. The neighborhood text group was exploding with activity. Tom had called an emergency gathering at his house to discuss the morning's events. On my drive there, Janet called to inform me that an emergency HOA board meeting had been called for that evening. Karen is in full damage control mode, she explained. She is telling people you threatened her and she acted in self-defense. But too many people saw what really happened. The video is already circulating. When I arrived at Tom's house, still in my damp clothes, I found over a dozen neighbors waiting. Some I recognized from occasional greetings, others were complete strangers to me. All looked concerned, and several approached immediately to express their shock and support. "We saw the whole thing," said an elderly woman who introduced herself as Elaine. "My husband and I were walking our dog. What she did was absolutely disgraceful." "Karen has been out of control for years," added a man named Michael. "But this time she went too far." As we gathered in Tom's living room, the dynamics of the neighborhood became clearer. Karen had amassed power through intimidation and selective enforcement of rules. Many residents had simply kept their heads down, accepting her petty tyrannies to avoid becoming targets themselves. But physical assault on a neighbor had crossed a line that even her supporters found difficult to defend. By evening, news had spread throughout Lakeside Estates. My phone continued to buzz with messages of support and information about Karen's frantic attempts to control the narrative. According to several sources, she was calling emergency meetings with her core supporters, drafting statements about defending community property from belligerent trespassers, and even claiming that I had been drinking that morning, a complete fabrication. But her efforts at damage control were collapsing under the weight of evidence. Multiple videos of the incident had been shared. Witnesses were speaking up. The neighborhood that had once cowered under her authority found its collective voice. As I finally returned home to shower and change into dry clothes, I received a call from Officer Ramirez informing me that Karen would be brought in for questioning the following morning. The wheels of justice, so often frustratingly slow, were moving with surprising determination. There was something oddly powerful in the realization that sometimes the system worked as it should when evidence was irrefutable and public sentiment unified against a clear injustice. The image of Karen Winters being escorted to a police cruiser spread through the neighborhood group chat within minutes of it happening. According to witnesses, she had arrived at the police station voluntarily for questioning, but had become belligerent when informed of the assault charges. Her refusal to cooperate led to her formal arrest, complete with handcuffs and the humiliating walk past onlookers to the waiting police car. "This is ridiculous," she had reportedly shouted, loud enough for the small crowd outside the station to hear. "Do you know who I am in this community? This is a complete overreaction." The community reaction was deeply divided. Karen's core supporters, mostly newer residents who had moved in during her tenure on the board, expressed outrage at her treatment and continued to circulate her version of events. But the majority of neighbors seemed to oscillate between shock and a barely concealed sense of vindication. Years of petty tyranny had finally culminated in consequences. 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting in the county courthouse for the preliminary hearing. The small courtroom smelled of furniture polish and anxiety. Karen sat at the defense table with her attorney, a sleek man in an expensive suit who exuded confidence. She had made an effort to appear subdued and professional, her usual designer wardrobe replaced by a conservative navy blue dress, her makeup minimal, her expression serious but not defiant. When I was called to testify, I felt a strange calm descend. Months of documentation and witnessing Corinne's escalating behavior had prepared me for this moment. Under oath, I recounted the events leading up to the assault, the peaceful fishing, the legal research confirming my rights, the gradual campaign of harassment, and finally, the confrontation. On the dock, the prosecutor played the video evidence on a large screen. The footage was damning. Corinne's aggressive approach, her escalating anger, and the unmistakable moment when she pushed me with both hands, sending me backward into the lake. Even with the courtroom's formal atmosphere, several spectators gasped audibly when they saw the assault. "And what injuries did you sustain?" the prosecutor asked. "A sprained wrist, bruising on my back and shoulders," I replied. "Additionally, my phone was damaged beyond repair, and my fishing equipment, including a rod that had belonged to my grandfather, was lost in the lake." As the evidence mounted, something unexpected happened. Former residents of lakeside estates came forward with their own stories of intimidation and confrontations with Corinne. A family who had moved away the previous year described how Corinne had followed their children on their bikes, taking photos and claiming they were damaging community property. An elderly gentleman recounted how she had entered his backyard without permission to measure his fence height, then filed formal complaints when it exceeded regulations by 2 inches. Most damaging was testimony from a former board member, who revealed that the HOA had previously settled 2 cases involving Corinne's confrontational behavior, incidents that had been kept quiet through non-disclosure agreements and paid from the HOA's legal fund. Throughout these revelations, the HOA board's current leadership was conspicuously attempting to distance themselves from Corinne. An emergency session had resulted in a carefully worded statement expressing shock at the incident and emphasizing that Ms. Winters acted as an individual, not as a representative of the board. She had been temporarily suspended from her position pending the outcome of the legal proceedings. During a recess, Corinne's attorney approached me in the hallway, suggesting we discuss a settlement. "My client is willing to cover your medical expenses and replace your damaged property," he offered smoothly. "This could all go away quite painlessly." I declined. This had moved beyond compensation for physical damages. This was about accountability for years of unchecked bullying. When we returned to the courtroom, I noticed subtle changes in Corinne's appearance, her perfect facade beginning to crack under pressure. Her roots were showing in her highlighted hair. Dark circles under her eyes peeked through her makeup. She whispered frantically to her attorney, who appeared increasingly frustrated with her. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with 3 decades of experience, listened to all testimony with careful attention. When Corinne's attorney attempted to portray the incident as a minor disagreement that escalated unfortunately, and suggested that I had been provocative by repeatedly ignoring community standards, the judge's expression made her skepticism clear. "The video evidence speaks for itself," she stated flatly. "This court finds sufficient cause to proceed with assault charges. Additionally, the evidence of prior incidents suggests a pattern of behavior that cannot be ignored." As we left the courthouse, reporters from the local newspaper asked for statements. Corinne hurried to her car without comment, her attorney running interference. I offered only that I believed in the legal system and looked forward to resolution. The case would proceed to trial unless a plea deal was reached. Corinne's reign of neighborhood terror was ending not with the bang she had delivered on the dock, but with the methodical grinding of justice's wheels. The judge's gavel fell with a sharp crack that echoed through the hushed courtroom. "The defendant is found guilty of assault in the third degree," she announced, her voice firm and clear. After hearing all evidence and testimony, including Karen's unconvincing claims of self-defense, the verdict was decisive. Karen Winters sat rigid at the defense table, her face a mask of disbelief. The sentencing followed immediately: 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service specifically with public parks maintenance, mandatory anger management classes, and full restitution for my medical bills and lost property. Additionally, she was barred from serving on the HOA board or any community governance position for 5 years. "The court takes very seriously the abuse of authority and the escalation to physical violence," the judge stated. "Neighborhood associations exist to build community, not to provide platforms for bullying and harassment." As we filed out of the courtroom, Karen avoided eye contact with everyone. Her once powerful presence had diminished significantly over the months of legal proceedings. The designer clothes and perfect hair remained, but the imperious confidence had evaporated. Her supporters had dwindled to just 2 friends who stood awkwardly beside her as she received final instructions from her frustrated attorney. The true victory, however, came a week later when the newly reformed HOA board, now led by Tom and 2 other longtime residents, posted officially clarified rules regarding lake access. The new guidelines explicitly acknowledged that while the HOA maintained the shoreline and docks, the lake itself was public water accessible to all licensed anglers. Additional language emphasized respectful sharing of the community resource. The healing process began in earnest with a neighborhood-wide fishing event organized for a Saturday in early spring. Coolers of drinks lined the shore. Children learned to cast lines under the guidance of experienced anglers. Elderly residents who had lived on the lake for decades shared stories of how the area had changed over the years. I found myself at the center of many conversations, not as the guy who got pushed in the lake, but as someone who could offer guidance on the best spots to catch bass or the optimal times for fishing. Neighbors who had kept their distance during the conflict now approached freely, often with questions about techniques or equipment. "You know, what you did took guts," said Michael, the neighbor who had been at Tom's house that first day after the incident. "Standing up to her when most of us just kept our heads down for years." "I just wanted to fish in peace," I replied honestly, "but sometimes you have to draw a line." Karen herself had put her house on the market and moved away before her community service was completed. According to neighborhood gossip, she had relocated to a non-HOA development outside the county. The last anyone heard, she was petitioning to establish a homeowners association there, though hopefully with hard-learned lessons about the limits of such authority. 1 year after the incident, I stood on the same dock where it had all happened, casting my line into the calm morning water. The mist rose from the surface just as it had on that first peaceful morning. But this time, I was not alone. 2 neighbors fished from the shore nearby. Another resident walked the path with her dog, waving as she passed. Tom approached along the dock, carrying his own fishing gear. "Room for one more?" he asked. "Always," I replied, shifting to make space. We fished in companionable silence as the sun rose higher. Eventually, Tom spoke. "You know, it took something dramatic to shake people out of their complacency. For years, we all just accepted her bullying because confrontation seemed too difficult." I nodded. Sometimes standing up to a bully is necessary, even when it is uncomfortable. "Well, the neighborhood is better for it now," Tom said, casting his line. "More people participate in events, volunteer for committees. People actually talked to their neighbors again instead of just hurrying inside to avoid violations. As we continued fishing, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought me here. What had begun as a simple search for peace had turned into a battle against petty tyranny. The lake that had first represented an escape had become the battleground for a neighborhood soul, and then finally, the symbol of a community reclaimed. Sometimes, I realized, you have to get pushed into the deep end before you find solid ground on which to stand.